It was a cold afternoon in a quiet American town. One of those places where time seemed to slow down, and the rumble of old engines drifted through still streets. Inside a classic roadside diner, the scent of fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and fried food filled the air. The jukebox hummed softly in the background, while sunlight poured through wide windows, casting a warm, nostalgic glow over the red and teal booths. Conversations blended with the clinking of cups and plates. Until something happened that silenced it all, turning an ordinary day into a memory that would never fade. Reed Dawson, better known among his biker brothers as Red Dog, sat alone in his corner booth. He looked like a man life had chiseled from stone, sleeves rolled up to reveal tattoos that told stories no one dared ask about, a worn denim vest hanging loose over broad shoulders, and a gold cross resting against his chest. His hands were rough and scared, hands that had known the throttle of a motorcycle far more often than a handshake. To strangers, he was the kind of man you didn't approach easily, rugged, hardened, maybe dangerous. But behind those cold eyes was something else. Something wary. Something human. He stirred his coffee without looking up, lost in thought, unaware that fate was about to pull up a chair across from him. If you still believe kindness can show up in unexpected places, if you believe people can change, pause for a second. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to Stories of Kindness. Your support keeps these moments of real humanity alive. That's when she entered, or rather, stumbled in. A thin woman, maybe in her late 20s, wearing a faded gray sweater that hung loose on her frame. Her jeans were torn, her shoes didn't match. In her arms, she carried a little girl, barely 3 years old. Her hair tangled, her cheeks pale from the cold. The mother's eyes scanned the diner, not for a seat or a menu, but for something else entirely. Mercy. The waitress behind the counter gave her a wary glance but didn't move. Other customers turned briefly before returning to their food. Only Reed noticed the way the woman held her child close, whispering softly to calm her trembling. Step by hesitant step, she made her way toward his booth. Then, instead of sitting, she sank to her knees beside his table. The motion was so unexpected that every sound in the diner seemed to vanish. Her voice quivered as she looked at the half-eaten meal before him. Steak, fries, and a steaming cup of coffee. Her lips parted, her hand shaking as she pointed. "Can I take what's left? For my daughter," she whispered. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Even the jukebox's tune seemed to fade. Reed stared at her, frozen. The child buried her face in her mother's chest, clutching the thin fabric of her sweater. The woman's eyes were red. Not only from hunger, but from the shame of asking. Reed looked down at his plate, then back at her. Something inside him stirred, something long buried. Guilt. Compassion. Memory. He had been many things in life, a fighter, a drifter, a man who'd made more mistakes than he could count. But seeing that woman kneeling there with her child, something inside him broke open. Years ago, he'd lost his own family. A wife who couldn't bear his chaos anymore. And a little girl he hadn't seen since she was 5. Every night, when the engines went silent, her face would come back to him, small and smiling, somewhere far beyond his reach. And now, here was this woman, pleading for food not for herself, but for her child. The same way his little girl might have needed someone once, and he hadn't been there. Without a word, Reed stood. The woman flinched, fearing he was angry. But instead, he slid his plate gently toward her and walked to the counter. Every eye followed as he murmured something to the cook, who nodded and got to work. Moments later, Reed returned with 2 takeout boxes filled with warm food and a small bottle of milk. Then, this rough, tattooed man knelt beside her on the diner floor. "This isn't leftovers," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "It's fresh. And there's more for tomorrow." He placed the boxes in her hands and reached into his vest, pulling out a folded bill. "Enough to feed them for a week." The woman's lips trembled. She looked down, then up at him, tears spilling freely. Why would you help me?" she asked. Reed's gaze fell on the little girl pressed against her chest. "Because once," he said quietly, "I couldn't help mine." Silence filled the diner again. But this time, it was sacred. The woman clutched the food and money, whispering broken thank yous. The other bikers a few booths away turned their heads, some swallowing hard, some pretending not to wipe their eyes. The waitress, who'd been frozen moments before, came over and placed a warm cup of cocoa in front of the child. Reed sat back down slowly. His heart felt heavy, yet lighter than it had in years. He watched the woman leave, her daughter in her arms, her eyes brighter now. The hum of conversation returned, the soft clatter of dishes, but something in that diner had changed. Kindness lingered in the air, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. Reed looked out the window and caught the faint reflection of the mother walking away. For the first time in a long time, he smiled. Not the tough biker grin he was known for, but a quiet, genuine smile of a man who just found a piece of himself again. That night, as he rode home under the fading light, the wind rushed past him, carrying away years of regret. In his chest, something warm stirred. Hope, maybe forgiveness. He thought of his daughter and prayed she was somewhere safe, cared for by someone kind. Because that's what this day had shown him. How a single act of compassion can change everything. A woman who had nothing reminded everyone of what it means to be human, and a man who thought he had nothing left to give found his heart again. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to Stories of Kinness. Sometimes, one act of love can change a life forever. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you were in the biker's place? Comment below. Your words might just inspire someone today. As the neon lights flickered outside that little diner, no one who'd been there forgot what they saw. One question. One plate of food, and a silence that spoke louder than any words ever could.